Yo, what's good, y'all? Hope everybody's well. Welcome back to the Onyx Report. All right, here we go. Anyway, welcome back to the Onyx Report, Black Masculinist news for the day. Had some work done in my office, and I think the guys actually unplugged some of my equipment. I didn't know that till just now, so y'all know how it is, technical issues. Anyway, that aside, welcome back. Good to see a couple brothers in the house. Shout out to O'Shea Duke Jackson. Just watching you about a half hour ago, good brother. Appreciate the support. Always down to come to the channel, represent, you know. And O'Shea is a scientist at this YouTube thing, so he'll give you, you can get, if you can get with him and he looks at your channel, he can perform surgery. So support good brother. He's doing extremely well. It'd be good to catch up with him again. Shout out to some of the other, and I appreciate the support. Also appreciate Barry Little. Appreciate that support early on. Says setting it off with the tuition drop. Much appreciated. Shout out to Layman's Journal. Appreciate that support as well. Let's see here. Shout out to Greg for the Cash App. Appreciate that. So like, share, subscribe, join, and donate. Support the channel if you will. I got a class that I have to teach at 6. So this is going to be another short piece. Shout out to Barry. Shout out to Spain Man. It's good. Just hopping through a little bit. Shout out to Brother Damon. Yeah, hit the super chat. Support the channel. So we can do this. Shout out to Ian. Always comes through with the information. Much appreciated. So look. Have a conversation about boys. Y'all know, not long ago, I want to say within the last 2 weeks, I did a response really to Richard Reeves. Richard Reeves, scholar out of Europe, doing work on boys, advocating for boys, and being willing to fight the fight to some extent. We have a slight disagreement where he talks about brain development for boys, and he kind of goes into why that should justify, boys being, starting school a year later, So that said, I disagreed with that, but overall, I support his primary argument about the need to invest in boys and to reconsider pedagogy in school systems. Right? I do. But I ran across something today on Facebook I thought was interesting, and I'm gonna show it to you. So it's an advertisement. And to be clear, I'm not really advocating for the product itself. I'm advocating for what it represents as far as boys in education. Shout out to Corey for the support. Appreciate that. Right? So let me go ahead and pull this up. And I'm going to play it without sound because it has music. So I don't want to get caught up in that. I want you to check this out. So it's this kind of tactile kinetic software. And it's done on a projector, and there's a remote for the teacher, right? You see that? Play loose. I'm gonna play it again because it's just a short thing. But they're interacting with the material on the screen that's being projected, and it responds. Now, part of the problem we have is that in our current, especially in the West, particularly in the United States, our current method, right, of learning is very feminine based, very feminist centered. It's gynocentric. It's really rooted in sitting and being quiet for long periods of time. And boys find themselves punished essentially for not being girls. Shout out to Quanos for the support. Shout out to Brandon. It says paying tuition. Appreciate that. Shout out to Tim Howard. Thanks for your continuous fight against black men and boys and men and boys in general. I think he means for, but I appreciate that support. Right. But what I'm saying though is what it represents. I don't know anything about the actual product itself. I'd never heard of it before today, but I think it's on the right track. I think it's on the right track because boys, most particularly, need hands-on, activity-based approaches. And there's a lot of different ways that this is termed. They use different terms like verve and so on. So I talk about kinetic or activity-based, kind of pedagogy where getting up and moving around is part of learning. And I don't mean just in elementary school or in preschool. I mean as an active part of learning. Boys tend to be very high contact. So that being said, I think this type of equipment would be useful for helping boys in general. So let me see. I'll show you something else. Now, hit the Cash App, support the show if you will, so we can continue to bring you this independent black male thought. Y'all know what it is. Didn't mean to side of here. Come on. There we go. And also support the Onyx Network. So here we go. Now, we know, and Richard Reeves talks about this as well, right? That boys don't tend to do as well in school. Girls across race are running past boys. And this is something Reeves presents as an innate quality in girls, that they're just so brilliant and incredible, and the boys are basically just, not capable of keeping up. They take too long to develop. They're immature, so on and so forth. That's not really how I frame that. And I've talked about this before. I think it had a lot more to do with policy, had to do more with holding boys back by not actually setting up the approach in the classroom and the curriculum and the very pedagogy used in a manner that supported boys. If anything, what we did is we punished boys. We put them into detention. We put them into, we expelled them. We put them into special ed, especially for black boys. We punished boys that didn't have the same type of engagement as girls. And the boys that did well, like myself, for example, we were boys that could code switch. We were boys that could sit still for periods of time. In other words, we were boys that could adapt to learning in ways that are generically like girls. Those boys did well. The other ones, no matter how intelligent they were or capable they were kind of shipped off to special ed. Right? The ones that kind of found a way through athletics and whatever, they may have suffered in the classroom to an extent, but because they brought something valuable to the court or the field, they were allowed to stay around. And some of them made their way all the way through college, even though they didn't possess the academic skills. That's primarily been the method that I've been witness to, both as a student and as a teacher and a professor. But here, you can actually see in this paper, this is from 2013, they talk about another reason why boys fall behind. Right? Title of the paper is Non-Cognitive Skills and the Gender Disparities in Test Scores and Teacher Assessments, Evidence from Primary School. Christopher Cornwell, David B. Mustard, and Jessica Van Paris in Journal of Human Resources, Volume 48, Issue 1, January 1st, 2013. The abstract reads, using data from the 1998-99 ECLSK cohort, we show that the grades awarded by teachers are not aligned with test scores. Girls in every racial category outperform boys on reading tests, while boys score at least as well on math and science tests as girls. However, boys in all racial categories across all subject areas are not represented in grade distributions where their test scores would predict. Boys who perform equally as well as girls on reading, math, and science tests are graded less favorably by their teachers. I'll read that part again, right? Boys in all racial categories across all subject areas are not represented in grade distributions where their test scores would predict. Boys who perform equally as well as girls on reading, math, and science tests are graded less favorably by their teachers. But this less favorable treatment essentially vanishes when non-cognitive skills are taken into account. For some specifications, there's evidence of a grade bonus for boys with test scores and behavior like their girl counterparts. Y'all don't hear me. Y'all don't hear me. Basically, what this is saying is that at least for the last decade, it has been known that boys are being mistreated for not being girls. Right? This is something we've been talking about on this show and in others like it. But there's no trying to highlight this real quick. There's been no, kind of traction in that. And many of the men in this space have talked about having these experiences, right? They have had the same kinds of experiences. And you got brothers in their 50s who are talking about how they've gone through this very same thing since elementary school, right? Same deal. So we're basically looking at is a situation where teachers themselves are grading boys less, despite their test scores showing that they're as capable as the girls. And then going further, right, in terms of treating them based on measuring their contributions on the basis of whether or not they perform like girls, right? That's the basic argument that we're looking at. So if you take this, we got to ask the question, who are the teachers, right? So I'm going to show you two charts, right? Just real quick. Percentage distribution of teachers in public elementary and secondary schools by race/ethnicity, school years 1999 to 2000, 2017 to 2018. So in terms of race and ethnicity, right? Yeah, I'll enlarge this a little bit. You can see on the left side, majority white teachers, elementary and secondary, right? Majority white. Doesn't change much from 1999 to 2018. Goes down a little bit, about 5 points. But there you go, 5%. Right? You got black, you got Hispanic, everybody else is around 1% to 2%. The overwhelming percentage of teachers, right, are white. Let's check out gender. Right? Percentage distribution of teachers in public elementary and secondary schools by instructional level and sex, school years 1999 to 2000 and 2017, 2018. That's what we're looking at. Right? So you got male and female total on the left. In the middle, you got elementary school. On the right, you got secondary. Right? So we'll just go from the right side onto the left. So on the right side, secondary, you can see that, women still outnumber men as far as teachers are concerned, right? Dramatically so in elementary school. Dramatically. Shout out to BGS in the chat. What's good? Dramatically so. And so when you mix the two, you add them all together, you still have, a pretty significant, kind of 75 to 25 ratio of female to male. So basically what we're saying is that when it comes to who boys are being graded by, they're primarily being graded by white women teachers. It is what it is. And they have a bias not just against black boys, but boys. Now, I think it's a little more apparent with black boys, and I think it's a little more pronounced, but it's still there. It's still there. And so essentially what we're looking at here is a process where these teachers are grading boys against the standard that is female. Right? And then on top of that, we're going to ignore the fact that the people who are doing the grading are women, are female. Like that has no impact on this at all. And people are comfortable with doing that because it's been common practice for so long. But you cannot act like the people who are administering the services aren't going to have an impact on the product. And that's precisely what some researchers have known about. They've known about this for years. It's just a matter of whether or not these ideas have been publicized and popularized in mainstream culture. That's part of the issue. It's not necessarily happening like that. Right? That's part of what we're looking at. Now, in terms of talking about black boys, we always have to go a step further, and we also have to look, within, predominantly black schools as well. I think we can do that. Okay, let me go ahead and do it this way. So let's try to do that here. Bear with me here. And they have pulled together all, I don't know what they did with this system. Oh, hell. That is not what it was supposed to be. Okay. I'll try it over here then. I think this will work. Maybe it is not. Okay, there we go. Sorry about that. So here you go. So this here is an interesting kind of paper, 2019. And what it essentially attempts to do is highlight what would help for Black boys in the classroom. Right? As Black Boys Matter, strategies for a culturally responsive classroom. I'm not against anything in here. I'm probably more excited about some ideas more than others, but I think it's important for us to consider. So it says this is the second of 2 articles discussing ways teachers can make their classrooms more welcoming and supportive learning spaces for Black boys. First article, Black Boys Matter, Cultivating Their Identity, Agency, and Voice, was published in February-March 2019, the issue of TYC. Right? American classrooms, including preschool classrooms, studies show that Black boys are more likely to be seen as problem children than their peers, and they're less likely to be considered ready for school. For example, a Yale Child Center study found that preschool teachers spent more time watching Black children than white children when looking for disruptive behaviors. Proactive, culturally competent teachers can work to counter these misperceptions and create classroom environments where Black boys feel welcome to learn, dream, and be themselves. And this is true. I think I talked about this last year where they actually had technology that followed the eye movement of teachers and who they spent their time paying attention to, paying attention to. And one of the interesting things about it too was they would watch Black kids who were doing exactly what their white peers were doing. They'd spend an inordinate amount of time watching boys, most particularly. And those boys, whether they were acting, properly or acting out, were still within the same parameters as their white counterparts, but they still got the attention, right? And this is where you start to see people being put into detention, being expelled. This is when you really start to see the impact on boys, most particularly. Now, girls, Black girls do get punished and disciplined, and at the worst, twice as often as white girls do. Black boys, however, just take the cake. They get it worse than anybody, except occasionally Native American boys are up in the same territory. But for the most part, it's Black boys. So even when they're acting right, they'll still be followed. They'll still be, kind of given negative attention, so on and so forth. This is what they deal with. Okay. So it says, in my previous article, I focused on how teachers can identify and begin addressing unconscious biases about Black boys through self-reflection. Here I offer teachers practical suggestions to help them foster Black boys' positive identity development, promote agency and voice, and create conditions that will empower Black boys to succeed in school. Right? And I should have read it out. This is from Brian L. Wright, 2019. So shout out to Brian. Culturally responsible strengths-based approach. It is important that teachers focus on what Black boys know, understand, and can do, as opposed to what they cannot do or what they do not know or understand. Culturally responsive, strengths-based teachers do not engage Black boys from a deficit perspective, i.e., having problems to fix or being at risk. Instead, they seek to learn about Black boys' strengths, gifts, and talents. 3 ways teachers can take this approach are by tapping into the power of history, celebrating Black boys in books, and rethinking school readiness. Now, I'm going to add a 4th one just off the gate, and I'm going to start it with that because he doesn't mention it in here. But really, one of the things that I think is becoming quite apparent, and there's been a recent article put out about it as well, is that there just needs to be more Black male teachers. Now, you guys know that the percentage of Black teachers in and of themselves is already fairly low, right? Not even 10%. But Black male teachers, now that's a whole different conversation, right? And there are a lot of reasons for that. A lot of that has to do with pay, but a lot of it actually has to do with treatment, how they're treated, right? And that goes from K through 12 all the way through college. I talked about this some years ago. This is something that happened to me teaching a class. Actually, it wasn't at Fresno, but I was teaching a class, and in it, I started talking about Black males. I was teaching an intro class to Africana Studies. In the intro class, you basically provide, or what I provide is like a sampler plate. of all the different areas of Africana. So we talked about class, politics, history, religion. We talked about all these different areas. But when we got to gender, I did 3 areas. I had womanism, feminism, and this was kind of before I developed Black masculinism. But what I did was I just started putting data on the board related to Black men. Homelessness rates, incarceration rates, murder rates, just I put up information. The majority of my class were Black female students. They were fundamentally offended, right? They were fundamentally offended that I had foregrounded Black males. So much so that they actually tried to get me removed mid-semester because they were offended. They argued that just focusing on Black males during the gender portion of the class was tantamount to supporting grape. That's what they argued. They said I supported grape because I formally talked about Black males in the context of gender, and I focused on where they were more vulnerable or had worse rates, or whatever, worse rates in regard to a number of different relevant metrics. They tried to go to the chair, they tried to go to the provost, they went to a variety of different levels, simply on the basis of providing information about Black males. Now, the Black males in the class, who were the smallest in number, were quiet. And the reason they were quiet is because nobody had ever told them any of the statistics related to them. Most of the classes they took, if they dealt with gender, only fixated on women. And if they took Black studies classes and dealt with gender, they only fixated on Black women. Nobody had ever talked about them. So they found that interesting. But anyway, so that being said, there's something to be said about a focus on Black males, but there's also something to be said about Black males being the ones to provide that focus. Now, what a lot of Black men experience, especially in K through 12 teaching, because I taught K through 12 as well. I've taught elementary, middle school, high school, and college. And just like I've said before, the problem Black male teachers tend to have is we end up being forced to be disciplinarians. It'll be your first day. You've not even learned how to teach. I mean, when I first started teaching, I was doing like sub work. I was coming in as a sub, this not long after college. They would throw me in a room and put the worst, in terms of their language, right? The worst, the kids with the worst behavior. They would put them all in my room. I didn't even know how to teach. I didn't even know what to teach. In fact, I was a sub. I was there to just babysit and make sure they just did whatever the teacher said that they were supposed to do. But instead, what would happen, I was doing this in Compton at the time, in the late 1990s, they would just take all the kids with the so-called worst behavior and throw them in the room with me. Why? Because I was a Black man, right? 6'2", 240, muscular. That was enough. In other words, they put me in this room because I was physically imposing. I was so big at the time. When I was working at Temple, I used to tutor the football team, and people would run up and ask for my autograph because they thought I was on the team, just on the basis of how I looked. So when I started teaching, they would put me in the classroom with these boys, none of the girls, none of the other. They always put me in a room of Black males, but not because they really wanted me to work with those males. It was because they didn't have anyone else that they wanted to put them with. They just wanted to put them somewhere where they could be overseen and quiet and kind of, disappeared. And they thought because I looked like a bouncer that would work. Now, the thing about it is, when you do this enough to the average Black male who's just trying to get his toe in the water as far as teaching, you're going to burn people out quick, real quick. Especially if they don't even have the skills yet. If they've not learned how to teach, they haven't even shadowed somebody yet. They'll throw you. And this happens, especially in Black areas. You're a Black male going into teaching, you will find something like this at some point. And I've talked to scores of Black men who've actually, some who have had teaching experience working in spaces where they've tried to build programs, they've tried to get funding, they tried to bring in outside support to help them. And the people that blocked them the most were administrators at the schools. The very same administrators that will throw them in a classroom with the worst behaving kids, especially the ones that are physically intimidating for female teachers. Those are the ones they'll throw you in there with, but they'll give you no resources to do anything with them. The idea is you're just supposed to physically impose silence on them until it's time for them to leave. I'm not saying that's, across the board in every context, but I am saying it happens far too much. And this is one of the reasons that Black males, in many respects, don't go into teaching. Predominantly female field. And the other thing about female spaces that nobody wants to talk about publicly is that, as in any space where you are not in dominant numbers, you'll tend to find yourself either ignored or outright mistreated. We can talk about that in terms of race, but for some reason, when we talk about that in terms of gender, we can only talk about it if women are in the minority. So if you go into engineering or any space where women are in the minority, we can have conversations about them feeling excluded, about them being mistreated, about their skills being, underestimated. We can have all those nuanced conversations. But when you talk about men going into predominantly female spaces, now all of a sudden we got to be quiet, as if those dynamics don't happen there. And trust me, they do. And that's with men across race going into predominantly female spaces. Think about how much more it is for Black males. And this happens, and I've talked to brothers from Oakland to Chicago to New York who've been doing this, to the South, predominantly Black spaces run by Black women. They'll be the first ones to throw you in that classroom, put all the kids that are the most threatening, the most intimidating in the room with you, give you nothing to do anything with. And when you go out and find resources yourself, even when those resources don't violate any kind of school code, you'll often find resistance administratively. A lot of what burns Black male teachers out is not the kids. The kids will drain you, but it's not the kids. It's the administration. But, anyway, a lot of those boys, and I remember, I even in grad school, I was teaching in programs. I had to teach a program where these boys were court ordered to be in my class to get their GEDs. They were court ordered. And some of them were huge. Them same ones that wanted to get in my face and challenge me physically, when I left that program a few months later after I finished my degree, were the first ones to cry. Because they were still boys. And they were boys that people were afraid of. They'd learned to use intimidation to get what they wanted, but ultimately, people were too afraid to connect with them. And all it took was somebody who wasn't afraid of them, but at the same time, loved them. Because I saw myself when I looked at them. So you're not going to scare me, for one. But for two, I love you anyway. So sit your little ass down, let's get to work. That's the attitude I had. By the time I left there, the biggest, most threatening ones there were crying. First ones. That's how, you had to get past that wall, as it were. But once you do, it is what it is. But the biggest limitations did not come from the kids. They came from the administrators. They came from administrators that were looking to climb the ladder as fast as they could and step on you to do it. And if they burned 3 or 4 Black males out, it didn't matter. As opposed to giving them the resources and support these males could have used to stay in the field, most of the guys left as soon as they could because they weren't properly supported. Anyway, so going back to this, he's going to give us 3 ways that teachers can make this approach work. Right? Here's the thing. The first way I would argue that he didn't put on here is Black male teachers. But the problem is you're going to have to give Black males an incentive to go into teaching. And the moment you give them something that other teachers don't feel that they're getting, that's where the problem comes in. So if you're going to have to offer them greater pay, first thing you're going to get is resistance on the basis of that. So anyway, it says the first way is tapping into the power of history. Culturally responsive teachers work to affirm Black boys' experiences through the content of their lesson plans. They incorporate books, visuals, and other materials that reflect Black histories, lives, and points of view. I'm not going to read through all of this, but I will put all the links in the description box when I'm done. I'll put this link in the chat right now for those of you that may want to look at this. Shout out to Wannabe Mystic. Appreciate the support. Says Black male teachers also have a habit of being fetishized by some female staff, and that gets old fast. That is true. That is absolutely true. And I want to be clear about this. When you start talking about Title IX, when you start talking about sexual harassment, understand something. For Black men especially, harassment can present itself differently. When you think about women, you think about somebody touching them, grabbing them, making inappropriate jokes, whatever. That's the standard idea that comes to mind when a woman says she's been sexually harassed. For men, it can present in different ways, particularly black men, right? I'll deal with it in terms of two. So there's threat, there's physical threat, and then there's the sexual threat, right? I've seen black men who are considered, and I got a colleague, brother of mine, who's going through this right now. He's actually had to get a lawyer. You're considered a threat just because you're physically imposing. And physically imposing just means people are scared of you. Because we know this happens from as young as 4. Black males are considered to be older than they are. And that goes hand in hand with threat. So yes, as a black male teacher, that is a form of racial and sexual harassment when you're assumed to be threatening simply on the basis of existing. That's the first one. The second one is a sexual threat, right? When you're accused of being a sexual threat, not because of anything you've said or done, but simply because you're a black male. In other words, they're engaging stereotypical ideas about you as a black male and applying them to you. And then trying to seek disciplinary measures against you because of the ideas they've associated with you. That's a form of racial and sexual harassment, especially when it plays on stereotypes about black men. So another sexual dimension to that is you can have colleagues, you can have administrators, you can have, peers, other faculty, especially women, who will make assumptions about your sexual prowess, what you can do, and talk to you about it openly, knowing full well that if you walked up to them and started talking about sex, that would be considered offensive. But because they're attracted to you, it's okay. I've had this happen as well. I've actually had this happen with a whole department. I remember attending a meeting for women's studies, and I remember having a conversation about some of the academic assignments I give in my class. And those ladies at that table drinking wine, mostly middle-aged white women, started talking about the sex they used to like having with black men when they were in college. Now, I knew this was awkward, but I didn't really know how to place it because, again, it didn't present the way I'm familiar with. So picture it this way. This is what my lady at the time who was there, she had to pull me aside and hit me to afterwards. She said, "You don't know what just happened, do you?" And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" She said, "Okay, picture a table full of white men in a department, an academic department. You're all out to dinner at a restaurant. They're drinking beers. You're all sitting at the tables. Picture yourself as an Asian woman," she said. "And you're at the table full of these white men drinking beers. And after 5 minutes of conversation, they start talking to you about how much sex they used to have with Asian girls back when they were in school and all the positions they used to like to do and all the stereotypical ideas about Asian women that they really enjoyed sexually." I was like, "Yo, that'd be harassment." She said, "That shit just happened to you and you didn't even know it." And she was dead on right. She was dead on right. But again, women can do it because we don't really have a stigma for that. We only know how to interpret it in terms of men. So anyway, shout out to Wannabe Mystic. Absolutely correct. Let me just go through a couple of these. Shout out to Ghetto User. Appreciate that support. Shout out to Big Kev. 75 to 85% of misogynoir is black women having bruised egos. Okay. But see, you can take that bruised ego and you can operate and act out against people, and it's okay. You act out as a male for any reason, it's called out quick. So these are the realities of what we have to deal with. Right? Okay. Kind of caught up. Shout out to Sincere. Says Abbott Elementary plays on this very trope. Oh, okay. All right. That's what it is. All right. So, he's talking about using history, right? Says many preschool teachers use the concept of history in me, which celebrates the richness of African American history and the roles black boys and men have played in bringing about social change through taking a stand for social justice and equity. When teachers embed a history in me perspective within the social studies curriculum, they also create opportunities to emphasize current examples of black boys and men as valuable community members. Right? So we'll skip ahead, get to part 2. So these are the 3 things he's saying will make the classroom better for boys. The other one he says is celebrating black boys in books. Right? As much like history and social studies books, carefully selected, authentic, multicultural children's books can also introduce black boys to mentors on paper. Black boys, perhaps more than any other group of children, need access to what Rudine Sims Bishop, I probably mispronounced that, calls mirror books, books that reflect themselves, their families, and their communities in positive ways. Currently, there are far more window books, books that give Black children a glimpse into the lives of other people, mainly the white world, than mirror books showing their own communities. These mirror books highlight cultural histories, music, the arts, language varieties, fashion, cuisine, and other culturally rich experiences found in Black communities to engage Black boys. We'll talk. And then some picture books recommended, right? And Riley Knows He Can, and Riley Can Be Anything, written by Davina Hamilton. Riley first overcomes his stage fright to play a wise king in the class play, and then imagines the many possible careers he might have. And you have Derek Barnes's Crown, an ode to the fresh cut, celebrates Black barbershop as a place that can transform a boy into a stylish king of his neighborhood. And lastly, combining the history of me and mirror approaches, Hey Black Child, written by Usaini Eugene Perkins, and Dad, Who Will I Be, written by G. Todd Taylor, use words and visuals to introduce readers to important people and events from African American history and encourage Black boys to pursue their dreams. Right? The third way that Mr. Wright says we can improve the quality of the classroom for Black boys is to rethink school readiness. Rethink school readiness. And it's this particular paragraph I wanted to share with you most. It says, one common indicator of kindergarten readiness is how long a child can sit quietly in a classroom. Sustained periods of quiet sitting may be helpful from a classroom management perspective, but they do not reflect what we know about the importance of movement in learning. In addition, long periods of quiet sitting undermine children's verve. The term verve is often used to describe energy and spirit in the arts. In education, it refers to having high levels of energy, being physically active and loud when mentally stimulated. Verve is a great description of how many Black boys behave when they are excited about learning. With the concept of verve in mind, culturally responsive teachers can encourage indoor and outdoor large motor and whole body experiences, such as by putting mats in spacious areas to encourage Black boys and all children to tumble and roll. Right? So three different areas and three different approaches on how you can make a class culturally responsive. So when we talk about, as we have been, this majority of the show, we talked first about the various ways boys are sidelined and downplayed, right? But now we're talking about Black boys. And there's two things I want to point out about why Black boys are graded lower. The first of which is the lack of culturally responsive classrooms. That's why I read that piece. So you can see the four ways I added the extra of having Black male teachers, right? That's the first way that boys are graded lower. They're placed in environments that are hostile. But then we actually have to talk about another actually hostile environment that has to do more with our own community, right? We got to deal with our own community. And by that, we got to talk about what I refer to and what Kevin Samuels used to refer to as this low boiling contempt. And this low boiling contempt for Black men is not limited to Black men. It's also extended to Black boys, often because they actually look like the Black men who sired them. Right? That's part of the problem. Let me see if I can pull it up here. I'm going to check out a piece. Shout out to Shay Charday. Been on her show many times. I'm actually supposed to be on her show this Thursday, I believe. So shout out to her. She did a video with a Caucasian friend of hers, and they were reviewing Cynthia G. So I'm just going to play about a minute of this. We can kind of get to it.
And the only reason I support...
Okay. Set up the sound here. My apologies. Cut the music. There we go. All right. Let's try that again. This is Shay Charday.
And the only reason I support aborting a Black child when it comes to it being male is because when I look at the Black community and the problems in it, it's associated with males and male pathology. When you talk about violence, it's associated with the males. When you talk about the women being forced upon, it's the males. When you talk about drugs, it's the males. When you talk about the fatherless children, it's the males. Every single problem that is happening in the Black community, you point to the males and then you have the culprit. So for me, I think that not selectively breeding is very irresponsible when you are the only one who has control over who gets to earth. Your womb, it carries the person to earth. So if you're the only one with that power, regardless of whatever he wants, if I feel like if Black men want Black women to give birth to their children, then they need to act like it. They need to go out, they need to clean the community up, they need to stick around, raise their children, stop being violent, stop forcing themselves upon women, stop toe tagging us every 5.5 hours, and then we won't have a problem with having your children. If they were being responsible, this conversation wouldn't be happening right now.
So, okay, so these are some of the lovely.
Oh my gosh. What?
Yeah. And I would urge you to check out the whole video to get the full response. Shout out again to Shay Sade, who I think is adding to this conversation well. But at the end of the day, as much as I've heard about how much people hate to hear Black men speak and how many problems they have with whether it be the manosphere or Black male academics, I ain't heard one brother yet talking about we need to kill or delete Black girl babies. I ain't heard it. I have not heard it. It's interesting to me how frequent this is, where you can have, even just in terms on an analytical level, the hostility extended to boys, and I can't even call them newborns. We're talking about Black males in the womb. These are Black men or Black males that these women would be raising, and yet still, the idea is they need to be deleted before they even have a chance to breathe. And we already know that's happening anyway, because if we look at the last 30, 40 years when it comes to abortion, Black women lead the pack. But that said, this is another reason that Black boys aren't doing as well. We're talking about a hostile environment for boys altogether. A hostile environment that does not acknowledge their humanity, that treats them fundamentally like animals. But in this context, rationalizing why they should die before they even have a chance to exist. I don't know. I don't know any other demographic that has this kind of conversation reaching the mainstream in this kind of way. You got guys who lost their channels because they told women to lose weight. But people like Cynthia G still got channels talking about, deleting babies before they're even born, and that's okay. It's ridiculous. This is absolutely ridiculous. There's something else I wanted to show you in regard to this. See if I can find it real quick, because it speaks to this very issue. When we talk about the hostility extended to boys, and we talk about how boys have to navigate it, we really don't always have a measure for how much it impacts them, how it impacts them, what it does to them. And it's something we need to pay attention to. So let me find this real quick. I use this in my class. I kind of talk about it to make sure we understand it. And I want to make sure I don't miss the opportunity to do that here. All right, so let me pull this down. I'm going to go ahead and put this up. So this is based off of a study, right? Based off another paper. Right? It's called Mothers, Academic Gender Stereotypes and Education-Related Beliefs About Sons and Daughters in African American Families. This is a paper that came out in 2009 by Dana Wood, Beth Kurtz-Kostas, Ndidi Okeke Adeyanu, Stephanie J. Rowley, Journal of Educational Psychology, right? May 2009. When you look at the abstract, the critical part of it, I have it listed in red. Right? Consistent with hypotheses, mothers held less favorable expectations for sons and perceived sons to be less academically competent than daughters. In addition, mothers reported stereotypes favoring girls over boys in academic domains. Stereotype endorsement, in turn, was related to mothers' educational expectations for and beliefs about the academic competence of their own children, even with youth's actual achievement controlled. Now, what does that mean? Right? Consistent with hypothesis, mothers held less favorable expectations for sons, perceived them to be less academically competent than daughters. In addition, mothers reported stereotypes favoring girls over boys in academic domains. Stereotype endorsement, in turn, was related to mothers' educational expectations for and beliefs about academic competence for their own children. In other words, a mother's confidence in her child, as she's the primary parent, especially in the Black community, where you have a good portion of single mother-led households. Shout out to J Block, appreciate the support. Says people like Sinji are walking plagues. Okay. Thanks, Clutch. I know. I got 8 minutes. I gotta go rush off and teach this class. Dudek, appreciate that support. Says the self-hatred is real. But the point is, in this particular piece, what you're seeing is an academic endorsement of what many already know. That if the mother's the primary parent, right, and you're in an environment as a boy, especially since the Great Migration, where you have people moving out of the South into the urban North, right? Used to be in the South, you would spend much of your time out in the fields with your father, especially if you were sharecropping, so on and so forth. By the time you move to the North, you're in schools, right? If you do have a mother and father living in the home, they're both working, right? But here's the thing. As a young child, the majority of your time is spent with your mother. By the time you go to school, the majority of your time is spent with female teachers. We've already talked about how female teachers engage Black males. But now, when we talk about how Black mothers engage their sons, especially if those mothers are upset with the father and carry that out against their sons, the impact is devastating. Now, this particular piece doesn't talk specifically about those nuances, but what it looked at was 334 mothers of 7th and 8th graders who completed measures of expectations for their children's future educational attainment. What they found was the mother's confidence had everything to do with their performance. And if that confidence is low as it pertains to Black boys, guess what the impact is on their performance? This is what we're talking about. The impact on boys. So when we get back to the whole question about not only why boys are not doing as well, but why Black boys aren't doing as well, we can talk about whether or not they're in culturally responsible classrooms, which we know much of the time they're not, right? Or excuse me, culturally responsive classrooms, much of the time they're not. Whether they have Black male teachers, much of the time they don't. Whether there's a pedagogy in place that actually makes their learning style as young boys a part of the lesson, or does it punish them for not being girls? We know most of the time they're punished for not being girls. But we also have to talk about this low boiling contempt for all things Black male in the Black community and the impact that has not only on grown men who we can see are starting to leave the country for a variety of reasons that people like to dismiss as just sexual, when we know it's a lot more than that. But now we have to talk about the impact that low boiling contempt has for Black male children, especially when they're not in a position to defend themselves from their own family members. This has to be taken into account, but you're not allowed to talk about this because it's misogynistic. That's in the general mainstream framework. If you deal with it in the Black context, you know, you're considered anti-Black. You hate Black folks. You hate the community. You hate the Black family. You hate Black women. Whatever. All these deflective tactics to avoid dealing with the reality of how these things actually impact Black males. This is why we have to have these conversations, right? Because at the end of the day, this contempt that we're hearing now, Cynthia G, in and of herself, you know, I wouldn't say that her approach to things is standard, but I will say how little pushback she gets, even in circles of Black women, is a bit scary in and of itself. It's a bit scary. When you look at the performance of Black boys and you look at how much energy is extended to make sure that black girls don't have to suffer the same way. It's problematic. Right? Now, I'm the first one to talk about how this kind of contempt is conditioned. It's supported by generations of policy. It's been cultivated over multiple generations. It is what it is. It's not something that people just woke up and started doing, right? But at the end of the day, it still has to be dealt with because the boys are suffering and they can't get on a plane and disassociate, at least not till they're grown. And the amount of trauma they may experience in the meantime is devastating. So, just wanted to put that out there because at some point we have to talk about what the real issues are going on with black males, especially in school, and how they're treated by teachers, by parents, by family members, by administrators, right? The kinds of classrooms they're in, the kind of pedagogies put against them rather than being provided for them, types of resources available to them in the form of, monies, also in the form of actual people. Black boys find themselves operating on their own. And you got people that, and this should tell you how actually low on the totem pole black boys are. You could have grown women on public mainstream media talking about deleting black boys, and it's perfectly acceptable. You tell me how long somebody's channel or TV show would last if you had black men up here talking about deleting black girls. But the funniest part about it is even the brothers that I know who are the most sick of how women act or whatever, they themselves aren't up here talking about doing anything like that. So anyway, y'all know I got to roll to this class. Appreciate your support, your patience. Please continue to support the Onyx Report. You can do that through YouTube with the Super Chat. You can do that through Cash App, through Venmo, PayPal. You can support through Patreon. Become a supporter of the show. Become a patron of not only the show, but you can also support the Institute for Black Male Studies as well as the Onyx Network. Right? Appreciate your support. Holla at y'all soon. Peace.